All right. Welcome to the Armchair Commanders podcast. I'm Jon,
And I'm Jack.
and today we are reviewing the 2004 film, The Alamo.
What movie did we watch?
I literally I just said it.
Sorry, I already forgot it.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
because
you're real clever.
I I gotta take credit for my mom on that one. I told her what I was doing Friday. I'm like, oh, I'm watching a movie for the podcast. 2004 is The Alamo. Legit looking confusion on her end. The what? And then I was like, oh, wait a minute.
Oh, good job, Deborah.
Yeah, and then she made a "there's no basement in the Alamo" joke.
There's actually I think it came out within the last year or two, a pretty popular book. It's actually called Forget the Alamo, and it's the whole premise of it is kind of dismantling all the mythos around it. I haven't read it yet, but I've heard it's gotten fairly decent reviews. But one of these days, I'll get around to it. I have a stack of shit that I still haven't read that I still need to get to. So
Hmm. I bet that movie. I bet that book was talked about a lot in the South.
yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of mixed opinions about it because from what I remember is that book did not give a very favorable reception to the overall story of the Alamo and the Texas Revolution. So I'm sure there's a lot of people who are like, "This is fantastic," and I'm sure there's an equal and or greater amount that are like, "How dare you tear apart our heritage?"
My heritage. Yep, I know exactly the type you're talking about.
So, what'd you think?
That was a movie. Like,
That's a common.
yeah, I know I say that a lot, but this felt just exactly that. Like, a mid movie from the 2000s.
Was there? What would you say? I guess I'm trying to rephrase my common question for you, which is what scene stuck out to you the most. But what about this film hit home for you, or like what was like, damn, this is good.
There was a part that I was gonna ask you about. Ask if it was historically accurate because you obviously know more about this than I do. But I can't for the life of me remember what that was. It might have been that it might have been that scene where that Mexican nurse lady kisses that sick dude and it like
The
transitions
sick
weirdly.
dude,
You know what the one I'm talking about, the guy that's like sweating on the bed for most of the battle and they like give him two loaded pistols to kill
Jim
soldiers
Bowie,
with. Jim Bowie.
one of
That's right.
the key characters in this entire movie, whose name is said probably over 3 dozen times, and you just remember him as the dude who is sweating.
Yeah, that's literally all I remember him as. And I don't know if that's
To
because I don't pay attention, but I don't know.
to
Like a
be
lot of
to be
critics agreed with me on it. It just seemed forgettable when it shouldn't have been.
to be fair, usually Jim Bowie is represented as having this super involved and heroic death, and this particular film shows a little bit more of an accurate version of him. So when this battle happened, Jim Bowie was legitimately on his deathbed because they, I think it was he had, uh, oh what the fuck was it? Consumption.
Tuberculosis.
Yeah, that's it. I could
Yep.
only remember the old timey word for it. Um, so even the idea of him being given a loaded pistol and firing it as the door like flings open is even stretching it a little bit because there's some people who argue that he probably was dead even before the battle started. It's a little details are a little sparse. Believe it or not everybody at the Alamo died. Um, I mean, all the military age fighting males died, but there's several, we see it in the film, but there are family members of the defenders. There are slaves of the defenders who survived the battle who are able to give an account after the fact. But obviously, because they weren't participating in the combat, their recollections still going to be a little muddied.
Well, that's that scene where he first comes to the Alamo, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm glad to be here. Oh, Davy Crockett's with us. We can't lose." And he's like, "Wait, I thought the fighting was over, wasn't it?" And everything gets really awkward, and then the scene ends.
Yeah, I the thing I so here's the thing is I actually wanted to spend a lot. I had a whole thing devoted to wanting to talk about Davy Crockett and this thing. Um, that one line kind of sat with me wrong. And granted, I don't know to what degree he thought the conflict was still involved, but like at the time that the real Davy Crockett is showing up in Texas, um, it's far from like a done and over matter. So I'd have a hard time believing he would be under the impression he's showing up as everything's all like, tidied up, wrapped in a bow, like where's my land deal. Because that's one of the first things we see in the opening scenes is if you come and serve in the militia, you get 600 some acres of land of your choosing, which did bring a lot of people out there. But the the thing that I think gets overlooked is the Texian army. I think was like 2-3 thousand guys maybe during the entire conflict, and mind you, the Texas Revolution was like 6 or 7 months long. Um, but of the like 2 or 3 thousand guys who served in the Texian army, I think the number is something like only a couple of hundred of them actually migrated to Texas right before or during the conflict because of that deal. Like a good chunk of the Texian army was made up of the Tejano people or people who had immigrated to the area of Texas like many years prior. So, I mean, it's a small and unimportant little detail in this respect, but like I said, I think David Crockett was probably he may not have known he was walking into a death trap, but I don't think he was under the impression that he was going to get out without any kind of fighting.
Man, like he was a well-known celebrity at this point. Like he's a household name for being a frontiersman and a cowboy. There were a
Oh yeah,
bunch of
oh
tales
yeah.
about him.
He was a super well known and super famous guy. And the thing is Davy Crockett, he truly does have a very interesting life story. Um, at the age of 12, his family uh, turned him into an indentured servant in order to pay off some family debts, which for listeners who are not super in the know of that kind of system, indentured servitude is essentially slavery, but with extra steps. And like, mind you, indentured as a white guy who's serving as an indentured servant, he's obviously getting treated much better than an African slave is at this time in history. But he's still a child who is forced to work and doesn't have freedoms. So I think that's an interesting starting point for this guy in his life. But we see it mentioned that he's a congressman before going to the Alamo, and when he gets to the Alamo, he gives a speech. He's like, "To hell with Tennessee! I'm going to Texas."
Yeah.
Yeah, fuck yeah, Texas. But the reason why he went to Texas is because he lost his his reelection for uh, being a congressman or a senator for Tennessee. And the reason he lost that election is at this time, Andrew Jackson is going through the process of doing the Indian Removal Act, Trail of Tears, and all that stuff. Like,
Ooh,
yeah, real rough time for a lot of people in this time of
ooh.
American history. And the reason that Davy Crockett lost his election, or people prescribe his loss to the election, is he was a super vocal um, advocate for the native populations. Like he was super against the Indian Removal Act, and that didn't really play well with his constituents in Tennessee. So off to Texas he went.
A little history on Davy Crockett and that, oh god, that story he told them towards the end of the movie to uh yeah, like when him and his men were starving and they huddled all the members of a tribe into one cabin and burned it down. And then when they searched it the next day, they found a bunch of potatoes in the cellar, and the boiling grease from the Indians seeped through the floorboards and onto the potatoes, cooking the potatoes. And then he said they ate them all. And if you pass me the potatoes, I'll pass them right back. Gallows humor. Oh, and I was just sitting there like, Jesus Christ.
Well, that's the thing is, I think that Billy Bob Thornton, I think he did a stellar job taking on this role as Davy Crockett. Um, and I think that little monologue of his is actually probably one of the best moments in this entire movie because you know you have this character who we see it. Everybody's like, "You're Davy Crockett. You can leap rivers and take down bears." Um, and he puts on his public face and he's like, you see him try to play it off a bit. He's like, "Nah, that was that feller on stage." Um, but even the little bit of pressure and he kind of caves and he'll let people think what they want because you know he understands that even though he knows that the legend is kind of bullshit, he knows that a lot of people rely on it in a way, or it's a big part of their day-to-day life in this situation. um so when we get all these kind of like big over the top, we see it when um I think another great scene is the scene where Santa Anna is ordering his troops to move the artillery closer to the fort, and one of the soldiers is like, "Davy Crockett's in there. He can shoot anything." And Santa Anna's like, "Move the motherfucking cannon." And then Davy Crockett shoots the epaulet off of him, and he's like, "Wind kicked up."
Yeah, I
Like
remember
that's
that
enough.
scene. I really doubt that happened, or did it?
I don't think it did. But
You don't
it's a great
say.
scene. But you have a guy who he's got a legend built around himself, and he does to a degree live up to it and kind of plays into it. But the scene where he's talking about this super vulnerable moment in his life about he participated in something terrible and it still haunts him to this day. Like it's a super real performance, and I felt genuine emotion when he was giving that monologue. And I think that's one of the downfalls to this movie is that there are other characters. There are big name characters in this. We have Sam Houston portrayed in this by Dennis Quaid. We have Travis, who is played by Patrick Wilson. We have Jim Bowie in this movie, Santa Anna. We have all these characters who are super big names who have such really like they have such complex stories to their lives that it feels like everybody else we kind of just get surface level with them. um you know, take Jim Bowie for example. He was a piece of shit. I don't know if you knew that, but
I mean, I kind of had an inkling.
yeah, like in this movie, we get the he's not that great of a guy because you know there's that scene where his slave is like, "Are you giving me my paper?" And he's like, "No, you're mine till the day I die." And
Yeah, that
that's
was.
a, that's about the worst thing he says or does in this movie. The real life Jim Bowie, he was so the slave trade at this time super complex and lots of variables and it's a very interesting topic in history to explore, but at this time importing slaves was illegal for American ships. Like it wasn't illegal for ships under different nations flags to import slaves, but American ships could not import slaves to the United States. That was a federal law at the time.
What year was the cutoff for that? Because I have heard of that.
That got enacted during Washington's presidency, actually.
Yeah, I remember it was like the early 1800s where they ceased all slave trade on the Middle Passage.
I mean, obviously, there was workarounds, and Jim Bowie
Yeah.
was one of the guys that found this workaround. So he worked in the slave smuggling trade, and at this time, if you provided the government with information that led to the capture of an illegal slave ship, you would get half of the value of what the slaves would have brought at market just as a straight like payout to you. So what this dude would do is he would arrange for a slave ship to come in, he would then tattle on it, it would get seized, he would get his payout, these slaves would then go to auction because the government's got to recoup its money, and then he would buy the slaves that he was importing anyways and essentially get them at half price and then resell them for full price.
Jesus
Like,
Christ.
yeah, he was a shitty human being. And the most we get to elaborate that he was like a not so great dude in the slave trade is he has we see a slave in this film and he's like, "You're mine till the day I die." And it's like, come on. Like, but that's what I mean is that's why I love Billy Bob Thornton's portrayal of Davy Crockett in this film is because this Davy Crockett in this film is like the only character we see of like a true like we're getting an expanded view of him as a person, and there's so many interesting individuals in this movie that they could have done this with.
Yeah. There's a lot of historical liberties. Like, for instance, nobody exactly knows how Bowie died. Not Bowie, damn it, Crockett died. And the whole spectacle of him being brought out in front of everybody, then dramatically bayoneted to death while he screamed. That is a theory, but the most commonly accepted one is he was just unceremoniously shot during the battle and they found him the next day. But they're
Yeah, I think
also.
I think the only one that people know for certain is the way that Travis's death was portrayed, which is early on in the battle he took a shot to the head,
was
and that's something we do see in this movie. So at least there's that.
was it a kid or was it a scared Mexican kids like frantically loading the rifle and accidentally shooting him in the face?
No, it was it, if I remember correctly, he was just like on a parapet during the scene, and then you see him just like do the dramatic like falling over thing.
Also, the speaking of just dramatically falling over, Bowie's scene where it's revealed that he's chronically ill. He's just talking with Billy Bob Thornton, then just falls on his face. And I just was thinking, oh, I guess he's sick now.
I mean, we do get a little bit of the like him coughing and whatnot, but the sickness seems to be kind of a sudden shoehorned issue.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Mexican army's here. Oh, oh, I can't. I'm too sick.
Oh, I really wish I could help you guys, but I just
Yeah.
oh Take that, Bowie apologists.
Do you know anything about the reaction to this movie in Texas?
I think I think the Texas reaction was fairly popular. The one thing I did look into, I was um, the production of this movie has quite the interesting tale. So I don't know if you did any research about the production or the just overall reception, but this thing was a box office bomb.
I did see something about that.
Yeah, it was like $100 million budget, and it brought in 25.
Ooh.
But you know, kind of going to our conversation we had last week about Wind Talkers, you know, immediately post 9/11, we had a lot of America fuck yeah type movies.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie, it originally started getting talked about or kind of being brought up shortly after Saving Private Ryan was made, which obviously was in the 90s. And it had this super troubled history of getting off the ground. Um, Originally, the director was supposed to be Ron Howard, and just disagreements with execs and studios. He's like, "Peace out," and then we no longer have Ron Howard directing the Alamo. And the other part of it too was originally the cast we see here was not who they had in mind. Um, Russell Crowe and Mel Gibson were actually uh, thought of as being like front runners for starring in this film.
Yeah, Mel Gibson. Hmm.
Imagine Mel Gibson giving the "Sell Our Lives Dearly" speech. We
Uh,
shall think of that as Texas.
so I pulled up some info about this movie, and a really bizarre example of this, despite the topic of the film. While there was a lot of while there was, you good?
Oh, I was trying to get into the theme of the movie, and I took a shot of tequila.
Oh, good on you,
What are you drinking tonight?
Pacifico.
Thank God you said something relevant. I was 100% ready to pull that, like the Key and Peele sketch from Substitute Teachers. Like, if one of you say some silly ass name,
You say some silly ass beer. But no, I actually got with the program. You don't have to fire me just yet.
thank you for doing something a little more
That
specific.
that and I ran out of Bud Light. But
What a tra- what a tragedy.
anyway, there was a lot of controversy both in the Mexico in in Mexico and the US, with the obvious exception of Texas, about the 2004 version. Since the whole topic about the war is considered taboo in both countries, the 2004 version took many pains in depicting the Mexicans in a more positive light in an attempt to avoid the movie being banned there. And then there's a note. Oddly enough, the John Wayne version was never banned there, despite showing the conflict solely from the Texan perspective. It also helps a lot the fact that previous to the 2004 version, Davy Crockett was normally considered in Mexico as a fictitious character created by Disney from previous films depicting him, and not a real life man who died in the Alamo.
Uh,
To
that last bit seems like a them problem.
to the grade, many Mexican history books tend to downplay his role in the historical battle and pinning almost all the blame on Samuel Houston and the rest of his men, maybe because no one is going to believe he really existed. The fact Santa Anna is considered as one of the most hated presidents in Mexico had due to his role in the war.
So wait, am I understanding it correctly? Are they saying that Davy Crockett exists because of Sam Houston, or are they saying that the Texan Revolution existed because of Sam Houston?
They're blaming Sam Houston for the war. It sounds like.
Okay, time the fuck out.
Oh no.
I know I'm about to trample on trample on some toes here. Um, I'm going to preface this with yes, I understand different points of view. We get different oral traditions passed down on both sides. There's their side, there's our side. Truth is in the middle. But here's the huge but. The lead up to the Texas War of Independence was not a spur of the moment deal. You really have to go back kind of a ways for where this all starts, and it truly starts when Mexico gets their independence and becomes their own country and separates from Spain. And during this time, they have the large territories of Texas and California as a part of their empire country, whatever you want to label it. Um, and they set up a constitution, um, and I don't know exactly what the government style was, but I know there was like an actual voting system in place. And one of the original beefs that Texas had was the fact that they only had like one seat in the legislature or whatever it is they decided to call their version of a legislature. So that was kind of the start of it. And then Texas originally started off as having a super small population of Tejano people. I think it was like five, six, 7,000 people. And where we get a bunch of US immigrants coming in is Mexico made it super easy for people to get Mexican citizenship and actually encouraged immigration because that was an increased tax revenue for them, was the influx of people moving into these sparsely um, sparsely populated areas. Now, obviously, there's a bit of conflict here because you had a lot of people immigrated from the south of the United States, where slavery was still a thing. When Mexico created their constitution, they abolished slavery, and when U.S. residents from the south moved into Texas and the California region, they just were like, we're just ignoring that rule. So I, there's that conflict there, but there comes a point where Santa Anna gets into power, and you know he's often he's famous for calling himself the Napoleon of the West, but he really was like when Santa Anna came to power, he tossed out the Constitution and essentially is like, I am emperor now, not in that exact words, but in in spirit. He's like, I am generalissimo dictator now. And that's where we get the super downhill slide of Texas being like, all right, fuck this. Like, so there was decades of build up to this. It wasn't Sam Houston came in and is like, you know what, Texas should be its own thing. Like it, there was a lot of conflict being brought up on both sides that led to this particular moment. Also, if Sam Houston was truly responsible for the Texian revolution, then like how do they explain the Bear Flag revolt in California that happened like 5 or 10 years later, independent of it? So, which also Santa Anna had to deal with and lost California because he wasn't actually that great of a general. But
Getting back to what you said earlier about
I'm
the
sorry. I'm sorry about my rant. That
no, you're
was
good. The a favorite a favorite scene of mine had to have been that towards the end after the climax, as oddly as that is. But that one general, that dude who boogied earlier in the film, what was his name? That the
mm,
general that kept going east and it pissed off his soldiers until he explained why.
Sam Houston,
Oh,
the
that
guy,
was duh. But
Dennis Quaid.
Dennis
I am
Quaid, yeah, that's right. He led the army, but
I am no Wellington, but he is Napoleon.
yep. That's what I was gonna say. Like, I really loved that line. Like, he fancies himself the Napoleon of the West, but I ain't no Duke. No, I ain't no Duke of Wellington. But he fancies himself the Napoleon of the West, and then he just did what the Duke of Wellington did and waited to pounce on Napoleon.
No, yeah, I thought Dennis Quaid's portrayal of Sam Houston was really good. I thought he did well in that role. I will say though that final battle kind of seems shoehorned into the movie.
Yeah, because it
It's
needed a
like,
happy ending.
yeah, it's like the Alamo and then one one battle and then hurrah, Texas.
Yeah, we had to we had to sneak in at the end that we did eventually win. I guess post 9/11 America.
I think one of the biggest ways that this film fails is, I went on my rant earlier about the lead up to the Texas War of Independence, and what we get at the beginning of this film is like one or two title cards that really does not do the whole thing justice. And I think you could get away with not giving all the context of the history leading up to this conflict if we did a better job of portraying Santa Anna. Because I don't like. What did you think of Santa Anna and the way he was portrayed in this film? Like when when you saw his portrayal, what was your thoughts of him as like a person?
So I don't doubt that he was a massive piece of shit, but to a certain extent, what does it stop? Like, when does it start being just straight propaganda? Because it really did feel like they were giving him a lot of kick the dog moments.
Right. Well, I think the like real layup scene for trying to show that he's a shitty person is, you know, after a dinner party with his generals, he goes to bed and we see like a very obviously unwilling girl laying in bed like and he like creepily closes the doors behind him and it's like, "Oh, he's a pervert." Um
Yeah,
um
a lot of moments
it's
like that.
I think there's that. I think you need the scenes of him being like the no mercy, um, to show his view of like trying to put down this rebellion. But I think imagine if this film, imagine if like the front half of this film was everything from like his perspective, and we just see him and like imagine getting a full deep dive of him and then the point of view flips once we get to the Alamo, and then we switch to the defenders. I think I think if Santa Anna is more accurately understood, then I think the power of the Battle of the Alamo is more significant at that point.
Man, I just can't put my finger on why this movie was so forgettable. Like, you heard me earlier, like, really stretching to remember the name of Bowie, whatever. Yeah, it's wild that David Bowie was at this battle.
I was waiting for some Ghosts and some Conjuring stuff to occur the second I saw Patrick Wilson on the screen. Like, man, they're really stretching for ideas for this series.
Yeah,
Just imagine a scene where in the middle of the battle, Travis draws like a pentagram on the ground and some fucking demon attacks the Mexican troops.
it has that like one line that all alternate history media has, like, it's the history they don't want you to know, or the secret history of the Alamo, like a
Yeah,
2 a.m. History Channel special.
it's that or it's like the failed Spike show that never got off the ground. It's like, what if the Nazis won World War II? What if Daniel Bowie had fought? Had it been a little bitch?
God.
I will say I greatly appreciated the one scene where Santa Anna yells out "Piratas."
Yeah, the acting from that guy was just delightfully hammy.
I kept thinking of different like King of the Hill quotes during this entire movie. I was like, "Where's the scene where we see Santa Anna's leg get stolen?"
Also, who is that black guy that initially fought in the battle, and then his master got killed, and then he went back to hide and was practicing the "I'm black, don't shoot" line in Spanish.
I forgot his name, but he's based on an actual person who was there. In this film, he's the slave of Travis, but yeah, one of the slaves is actually where we get our accounts of the battle from. So
Huh.
I think that's another kind of underappreciated scene is when the two slaves are digging the well together,
You're like, hey,
and
this is kind of bullshit.
the older slave is like, "Hey, as soon as they start shooting, you don't owe anybody anything," and the younger guy's like, "But he's going to give me a gun." He's like, "The fuck he is." Oh man, what did you think of the set of this film though?
I've never personally been there. Have you?
I have not. I've been to Texas many times. The the only thing about this film that I can say I related to is that Texas does have some pretty beautiful sunsets, and the sunset scenes in this movie really kind of, I feel like the sunsets make you understand why Dying for Texas makes sense a lot more than the people actually talking. Like when Travis gives his "We will sell our lives dearly" speech, I'm like, I'm supposed to come up with my own like, you never gave me a reason why Texas is worth fighting for. You
Because we
you
say
basically
so.
you essentially said just come up with something you really like in your mind and then just imagine that's Texas. And it's like, hold up. But no, like the sunset scenes in this movie, really, I'm like, you know what? If I could see being inspired to defend a fort to the death for that beautiful sunset. But the thing I really appreciate, there's a couple of things about this. I think it's obvious that I enjoyed this film, but another one of the things that I appreciated about this film was the set and how much attention to producing the fort and the town they put in.
Yeah.
And the other part too is the I feel like we get an accurate size representation in this battle, and I think that's lost in a lot of pre World War II movies where we have, flintlock or percussion rifle battles where it's like line formations and stuff like that. Because this battle was 200 people versus like 4,000. And when I watched this movie, I'm like, you know what? I'm like, it 200 people seems like it's right, or as to what I'm seeing on screen. And you can obviously tell that the defenders are outnumbered, but Santa Anna's army doesn't look ridiculously huge either. It's not like, take like 300 for example, where the 300 Spartans looks like 20 dudes, and then the million Persians looks like 10 million.
Yeah. Yeah, it was beautiful set pieces. I like the cinematography in most of those sunset scenes, especially that part where they were playing the slit throat song, dig whatever. But he decides to
Duelo.
Dajuelo, but he just decides to join them one night on his fiddle. It was a very beautiful scene. It reminded it reminded me of this one story in World War I where the Germans came up with a song to demoralize the British about how much Britain sucks to live and how crap of an island it was. And then
Water sucks.
eventually the English joined them in singing how much it sucks.
Well, if you can't beat them.
Which I've always thought that was like the most beautiful way of dealing with that. Something trying to demoralize you is joining in.
Well, I think it kind of touches on one of those tropes that we see in movies of, you know, another popular story or scene that gets told in film is like in Band of Brothers, where they're in the Battle of the Bulge, and you hear the Germans from across the forest singing Silent Night in their own language. Um, I really appreciate scenes that take the time to humanize both sides of a conflict at the base level.
Yeah.
But the Davy Crockett fiddle scene, just another feather in the cap for Billy Bob Thornton in this film. I
Oh yes, absolutely.
I I don't know if I should be ashamed to say this, but I have I looked up the movie soundtrack and I have that once the duet of Duguelo with Crockett playing his fiddle, and it's now number one on my Spotify playlist. It's a bop.
But like that begs the inevitable question: did that actually happen?
I don't I don't think there's any recorded accounts of it happening, but far from I know I've talked with a bit of authority this particular episode, but I also am not an expert. And please, for anybody who finds something wrong with what I'm saying, please point it out so I can learn and take me down a notch.
Also, I'm pretty sure I saw a couple of soldiers shoot twice from the same musket without reloading. That kind of bothered me.
What if it was a double-barreled shotgun?
Oh well, shit, you got me there.
If Do you remember the scene where they first kind of probe the Alamo's defenses and they go to burn the huts? And there's a Mexican soldier who like pops out of the hut to shoot Davy Crockett, and the musket just like blows up in his face.
Yeah. Like, what was he doing? Was he just there to ambush them on the off chance they do come out?
Yeah, I don't know that, or maybe he tried hiding in the middle of the battle because he's like fuck this. But um, yeah, I don't know. So we talked a little bit about the reception of this film, and I was reading some articles, and one of the things that I came across I found very interesting. So this film was released in 2004. Obviously, we're a couple years removed from 9/11 by this point. Not everybody is super stoked on Iraq, but do you know what else is happening in 2004?
Um, Boy bands everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, there's that scourge, but
Frosted Tips.
the
Numa
Bush
Numa.
Kerry the Bush Kerry election is happening.
Oh, right.
So one of the proposed theories for why this film didn't perform so well is it got released during an election year where a Texas president was waning in popularity. And I wonder what you think about that theory.
Hmm. I I don't think so. There has to be another because 2004 was stacked for releases, and there were a lot of big name movies then. Had to have been like
Anchorman?
yes, Anchorman. That had to have been the main competitor. But I think there's some truth to that. Maybe that did dissuade some people.
It seems like it was a minute late on the post 9/11 uh, America Fuck Yeah train. I think another thing that didn't help it is did you see what the MPAA or MPP motion picture whatever the people that give the arbitrary ratings to films, um do you know that so this is actually a Disney produced film? Shocking, I know. um but Disney pushed hard for this film to have a PG-13 rating, and that was one of the reasons why a lot of the people who were originally involved in the project left, was because they wanted it to be a hard R, to kind of be along the lines of a Saving Private Ryan type intensity. And I can't help but wonder what film we missed with their pushing for the PG-13.
That is a good question. Maybe more blood.
Maybe Bowie coughs up like an organ or something.
Yep, definitely.
Maybe we maybe we hear some Texan from the 1830s refer to a slave by their derogatory name that they most definitely
Whew,
used.
whew, whew.
It really seems disingenuous for people to be portrayed as slave owners and to never once say the N word. Like, come on.
Yeah.
It's like I said. It, I get it. It kind of takes away from the hero image that they're trying to portray for these guys, but these guys weren't perfect, and it goes back to my thesis from earlier. That's what makes Davy Crockett's portrayal in this film so good, is that at no point are like we don't get the PG-13 version of Davy Crockett. Like we get the skeletons in his closet, you know?
Yeah. And then we get the story about the potatoes.
I just pass them right back.
Yeah. Whether that's his true story or he was just telling that to fuck with them, we'll never know.
So what did you think of the battle scene, the actual attack on the fort scene?
It's weird. It's weird how close they were able to get before being heard or seen. Like security was that shitty where 2,000 Mexicans can get the drop on you.
Well, I mean, they'd been continuously shelled for the better part of 2 weeks. I imagine they were probably exhausted by that point.
I mean, yeah, the fact that they were able to go from like dead asleep to just awake and fighting, man, I can barely get
Adrenaline,
moving in the morning.
adrenaline's a hell of a thing. Have you ever had a you ever had one of those moments when you're driving around and you get into like a super close miss, like a car accident or something, and your heart just like drops into your stomach, and you are just like immediately 100% like alert and just like scared shitless, like
I get that, but
that.
I also get jelly legs.
Yeah, adrenaline's a heck of a thingamajigger.
Yes, it is. Never ever rely on it, but when you need it. I'm trying to think about what else to talk about in this movie. Like, were there any historical inaccuracies that jumped out at you? Or I aired mine with no one really knows how Bowie. Damn it, Crockett died.
um yeah, I mean, there is inaccuracies with this, but I think that has more to do with them working with a time constraint for the film. I mean, and I mean, there's obviously the inaccuracies we've already discussed. I think one point that I felt was a little I didn't know how to feel about it was you remember the scene of the God, what was his name? I don't remember. The dude who left on horseback to deliver the message to Houston saying, "Hey, the Alamo is about to fall. We need troops." And Houston's like, "You get to stay here." And he's like, "No, I don't get to die." Well, at the end of the movie, there's that little title card where it says he returned to the Alamo and buried his brothers. It No, he didn't. Um, After the Battle of the Alamo, the Mexican forces took all the bodies, defenders and their own troops, and made these giant funeral pyres. There's like three or four of these giant funeral pyres of just like hundreds of bodies each, and they sent them up because they they weren't going to take the time or the energy to bury. I think the total dead count after this battle is like 600 or 700 people. Um, so it was an economical thing. They're like, we gotta dispose of these bodies, but we can't bury all of them. So they all got burnt. And if you go to San Antonio today, um, and go to the Alamo, the only thing that remains of the Alamo is the mission building itself. Um, they have the outline of the wall marked out on the street, but it's literally like in downtown now, in the middle of an urban sprawl. Very very different from what we see in the film. But across the street is a building that has a giant sarcophagus that purports to have the ashes of the Alamo defenders, which maybe it does, maybe it doesn't.
Mm.
Not a real way to 100% confirm that particular fact, but that's what they say. Just like there's a spot on the actual Alamo mission that's pockmarked with bullets, and the people who are for the theory that Davy Crockett was executed after the battle say that that's the spot where he was executed. But again, that's you can't prove it.
Yeah, there's a lot of contentiousness around this.
What would you what would you say, or like what the Alamo is definitely sold, and in popular culture has always been presented as a Texas story and as like an American hero story. But what would you think? Like, what would you want out of a Mexico point of view Alamo movie? Like, imagine Texas War of Independence film, but from Mexico point of view.
Well, I'd love that first off. Second off, maybe a more situated on the soldiers, like their point of view. Like they probably got drafted, pulled to go some battle in a place they don't give a shit about. And but hell, there are some that volunteered, so maybe a volunteer to play the foil. But you get what I'm saying, right? A story about the soldiers, not necessarily the leaders.
Yeah,
I would like to see how the average Mexican citizen thought of this battle as it happened.
like when they received news of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it probably got played up as like as a good like a big victory. Like Santa Anna crushes forces at this fort.
And I can't imagine they took kindly to soldiers using a place of worship as a fort.
I think that's one of the points they talk on early in the film, where they're like, yeah, it started off as a fort, but over like the past 40 years, or it started off as a mission, but over the past 40 years, it's changed hands between this place and this place and this place. And before the Texans, it was like a Mexican cavalry unit who used it as a fort. So I, even though it was originally intended to be a mission, I don't think it ever truly served that purpose.
Gotcha.
Which, speaking of the mission, remember the scene where the one dude is telling Travis, he's like, here's this saint who is the patron saint of inspirational speeches. Like, he gives two different saints' names. He's like, here's this saint and this saint. He's the patron saint of inspirational speeches. And then he never elaborates on who the other dude is. It's like,
Yeah, that bothered me.
it's like, is the other guy not a cool guy, or is he just not relevant to the story? Like,
he, he wouldn't happen to be the patron saint of military soldiers making a brave final stand, would he?
I don't know. There's so many patron saints. I you should kind of go on a Wikipedia deep dive someday of patron saints. Just the system of people getting sainted, but also
What
like,
they're patron saints of, the most
yeah,
random crap.
what their patronage is. So for our listeners, I do consider myself a religious individual, but I generally keep my religious views to myself. That being said, I come from a portion of religion that doesn't really acknowledge saints at all, but even just over the past couple of years, I've latched on to like two or three of them because I'm like, oh, they're relevant to me and they fall within sort of my religious beliefs. So on my water bottle, I have Saint Michael, who is the I have two stickers on my water bottles: Saint Michael and Saint Florian, who is the patron saint for uh, St. Michael's for military and law enforcement, and St. Florian's the patron saint for firefighters. And then there's a third guy for Freemasons, it's St. John, but that's
Why do you
unimportant.
like him?
No reason. Jack.
I just looked it up, and the saint that I like is Saint Lawrence. He's
What's his patronage?
cooking and comedians.
Oh, that's fun. Here's the thing. there is a patron saint for everybody, so I highly recommend, even if you're not a religious person, just find the patron saint who's most attuned to your lifestyle, career, what have you. It's a fun little trip.
Well, as I was gonna say, the reason he got that is because he was being executed, and he was like put over a what was essentially a big grill to be cooked alive. And as
Jesus.
and as he was burning on the grill, he yelled to the people holding him captive, "Turn me over! I'm done on this side." And that's how he became the patron saint of cooks and comedians.
I always would like. I think everybody has it in their minds that if they're presented the opportunity to have a brave death, that they would take it and like they'd have some sort of witty thing to say, kind of like the Davy Crockett scene where he's like, "I'm a screamer."
Yeah.
But when I watch that scene, I'm like, "Oh, that's a badass moment." But also, I'm putting myself in his shoes, and I'm like, something tells me I would probably beg for my life.
Yeah, I don't want to get poked.
But also, in a one of those I'm definitely dying situations, it's what card do you want to play? I'm just saying I'd like to think I'd play the brave card, but probably not.
Eh, always leave them laughing. That's my
Is
motto.
that it's a great motto to have.
Yeah, God willing, I'll never use it, but I think it'd be
you make
nice. May.
you make me laugh,
Aw,
sweetheart.
it's the one thing I wake up every day to do. Make you laugh.
You make me laugh. Something I realized. So I took a vacation down to Mexico a couple weeks ago, and one of the days, we went to one of those all inclusive paid resorts, and one of the days we left the resort and went to Chichen Itza, which is one of the like the ruin sites where the like the big pyramid is. And as we're driving there, us being the typical white people, we hired a driver to take us there in a private vehicle because we're bougie like that.
Mm-hmm.
It actually wasn't that expensive, but it was nice. Anyways, our driver, he's like, "So what do you know about Mexico history?" And I'm like, "Uh, not a whole lot." And nothing was. I was like, I could I could talk about Mexico stuff in regards to anything that involved the U.S., but then again, I'm going to have the U.S. perspective on it. And honestly, the only reason I know anything about like the Texas War of Independence or anything like that is because as a kid, I grew up in California, so they beat to death into us the Mexican American War and the Bear Flag Revolt and everything that led up to that. So if I what was your knowledge or education about this like before the movie?
Probably the Americanized version of chest pumping hero America.
But I mean, like when you were in middle school and high school, did they, other than saying that the Alamo happened, did they really go into the Mexican American War or any of the conflicts leading up to it,
They spent
or
more
was it?
time on the Alamo itself than any of the war.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of the big pitfall about the Alamo story is that the Alamo story overshadows the entire conflict, really.
Definitely.
But history's wit, history is written by the victors.
Never liked that phrase.
Yeah, especially in today's environment where, going back to the opening of our show, we're starting to get literature and material of, debunking the stuff that was written by said victors. So it's an interesting time in history to be studying because a lot of things that were taken as fact are getting overturned. So here's my pitch: go history degree. It won't do anything for you. It won't make you any money. I case in point, me. I make $0 off of my history degree. So
So far.
I paid a lot of money in order to justify a hobby. Like that's about that's about all my history degree has done for me so far is I get to say I have a history degree and then I can go on a tangent for 20 minutes about something and people will be like, "Uh-huh, uh-huh." And then they walk away because they don't want to talk to me anymore.
Ouch.
If anything, I'm a realist, or I think I am. But listeners, if you do like my tangents, please let us know on our Instagram and Facebook page, and or leave a review for us of what you think about my tangents. If you hate them, I'll curtail them a little bit and let Jack do more jokes. And I do apologize, Jack. I feel like I kind of bogarted this particular episode.
No, no, you're fine. You know more about this than I do, and it's your show.
It is not my show, it is our show.
It's like a 80-20 deal we have going on.
Okay, who is, let's be honest here, who is signing on to listen to me talk for an hour to an hour and a half? Like
Randa.
it's me. It is me rambling for 20 minutes. You make a smart joke, people laugh at your joke, and then they tune out for the next 20 minutes till you say another joke.
See, I'm the comedic relief or something.
Well, seeing as I bogarted this episode, maybe we can flip roles. I'll be the smartass next week, and you can be the ranter and raver.
But DP, I'm dumb as shit.
You're not dumb as shit. You're smarter than you give yourself credit for.
Oh no, don't do that. It'll feed my ego. Go ahead.
Did you have any other thoughts?
Not really. The battle scene was cool and all, but yeah, like you said, that ending, albeit a bit satisfying, was definitely shoehorned in and rushed. They didn't even say the name of the battle.
San Jacinto.
Yeah,
I don't know
San
how to
Jacinto, I
pronounce.
think it was, because I looked that up afterward because I was curious.
I will say, seeing Davy Crockett's violin get trampled brought a tear to my eye.
I I had a connection with that as well.
It's a small detail, but it's a good one. It's one of those things where it's you think today it's like that would be in a museum, but in that environment, it's like, oh, it's just a war trophy and it gets destroyed. Oh well. I think it's time for us to rate this. Do you want to pull up Rotten Tomatoes?
All right, the Alamo.
Was the was the good old thermometer have for us?
Well, nothing promising. It's 29% on the thermometer and a 45% audience rating. So a bit
So that that brings it to like a 35 ish.
something like that. But
So why don't you tell me whether or not you agree with it, and then we'll come up with our custom rating that we forgot to do last week.
you first.
So as I stated, I enjoyed this film. I do recognize the problems in it, and there's a lot of things that could have been done better. I think if we had gotten the R-rated version of this movie, it it really could have been spectacular. I also I also think if it had been made a few years earlier and there was a couple of different casting decisions, we would be looking at an infinitely better movie. But you get what you get.
Yep.
So I disagree. I disagree with the rating. I think this is more than a 35-ish movie on the thermometer.
Oh yeah. I'd, I think around 50-55% personally. It was I mean, it was no down Periscope. But then
No,
again, who
down
can be?
Periscope, down Periscope, it was not. So
That's really our
on
Citizen Kane, isn't it?
it might as well be. We should get a if we actually ever get enough listeners, we should get a T-shirt made up that just says "Kick this pig."
The two crabs and they're duking it out. Um,
Better yet, just the image of two crabs, and underneath it says "Duking it out."
I'm trying to think.
Okay, how about on a scale of 1 to 10 violins?
1 to 10 crushed violins. I'll give it a 5 or a 6 crushed violins. I really can't put my finger on it, but this movie was a little bit forgetful for me, and the historical liberties they took, kind of the Hollywoodization. I shouldn't be surprised, really.
I'm going to give this 7 crushed violins and um just the strings on top. So like like 7 and an eighth of a crushed violin,
All right. All right.
which I gotta say that feels a lot more wholesome than our tattooed penis rating.
I mean, I'm just upset we never got to see it. You can't talk about that and not show it. So I'd have to rate it lower.
How do you turn a PG-13 comedy into an NC-17 comedy? Kelsey Grammer's dick.
Just whip it out.
That's my life motto.
When,
Actually, no, it's not.
when in
I
doubt,
would
whip
like
it
to
out.
expressly, I would like to expressly say that is not my life motto. I do not live by that standard, and I do not approve of anybody who does. End statement. Don't at me.
Protect your ass. I get it.
Oh, so this was my choice. What do we have on the docket for next week?
Hmm. I'm looking. Sorry to keep you in suspense.
It's okay.
I know I just had one. The greatest beer run ever.
The greatest beer run ever.
Yep.
20. It came out last year, right?
Yep.
Vietnam.
Yep. It's on my list, and I want to knock it
Ooh,
out.
first Vietnam movie.
It
Well,
is.
do you think it's going to live up to Platoon, or
I think it's going to surpass Platoon. Yep. Bold statement, and you heard it here first, folks.
I can't wait to see what ridiculous rating system we have for it next week.
Oh man, I can't wait.
So, as I said before, check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Please leave a review. The stars do matter. Just as a quick note, I've discussed it with Jack, but I hope everybody enjoyed our episode last week with our special guest, Carl. I know we had a lot of fun recording that episode, and it was a different change of pace. But we're going to be keeping it under the lid a little bit at the moment. But we do have a couple of guests potentially in the shoot coming up here in the future. So keep an eye out for those announcements. And if they all work out, I'm going to be super excited for who we have joining us. So make sure to keep clicking on the episodes, and not because I want to get a sponsor or anything like that.
Well, I told you we'll get Bud Light eventually.
Not after me shitting on them for the first three episodes.
Oh, come on. They'd love to turn a critic into their best customer.
I have nothing against Bud Light, the company. I just think it's a subpar product.
Oh, okay, that's fair.
I love their horses.
Yeah, the Clydesdales are iconic.
Yeah, I took a picture with them once when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
Going back to the living out in California thing, I actually lived like 45 minutes away from one of the Budweiser plants. So every year they would bring the Clydesdale in and do like a car show and stuff.
Cool.
The good old days.
Yeah. Ah, the good old days.
You have anything before we sign off?
No, I think that covers it.
Well, all right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I've been John,
And I'm Jack.
and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.